Sorry for the delay. I'm going to get started. Abbey is going to join in probably just a couple of minutes. She's finishing up another talk just next door. But I'm going to go ahead and jump into it, and she'll join. So today we're going to be talking about putting the D back in DeFi. So what we really mean by that is that we don't really think DeFi, decentralized finance, is truly decentralized today. Where we're going to go today, what is DeFi? What do we mean by it? What actually makes a DeFi project decentralized? Having a closer look at some of those DeFi projects, a range of decentralization actually between them, and then closing with what can DAOs actually do for DeFi to start opening it up. So what is DeFi? There are lots of different definitions, and most of them touch on some aspect of what decentralization means, but they really range between bank the unbanked, super vague, but also important. But we think that probably the definition that really brings the D from DeFi to the forefront is the one at the bottom here, that decentralized finance is the movement that leverages decentralized networks to transform old financial products into, the keywords here are trustless and transparent protocols that run without intermediaries. And we think that that's probably the most important thing in a DeFi product compared to a CeFi product or a centralized finance product. So first starting with what DeFi means according to Coinbase, the operations are not managed by an institution. The code is transparent on the blockchain. dApps are designed to be global from day one. They're permissionless to create, permissionless to participate, a flexible user experience, and interoperable. But this also includes things like that it's open source, that it's auditable, transparent, global, censorship resistant. These are all good things, but definitions like this actually result in half-baked fintech solutions that use crypto. And this is actually Abbey's quote here as she walks up to the front, so I'll let her take it from here.
I'm coming from another talk, I'm so sorry. Hey, do we have two mics or just one? Okay.
Oh, no, we have two. Okay.
Cool. Hi guys, sorry I'm late. I was just finishing up another talk right next door, but you were saying it perfectly, right? Is that definitions like the Coinbase one, although that capture like the inherent like global characteristics of DeFi solutions, like generally result in like a leniency with definitions of decentralized tech that result in a lot of like kind of fake news around like how we're treating DeFi. And so yeah, this is a spicy thing. You delivered it really well. So if we want to hold ourselves to this definition of decentralized tech, which is a movement that leverages decentralized networks to transform, like re-envision these old financial products into trustless and transparent protocols that run without intermediaries, we need to be very transparent about which DeFi projects are actually trustless and transparent and running without intermediaries and which ones aren't.
So what actually makes DeFi decentralized? Coming to a real definition here that's more concrete that we can actually start applying to projects. The first thing is that there's minimal and distributed intermediary custody. So that's things like admin keys are not controlled by one owner. And there are tools that we can use to do this, such as multisigs, but if that multisig is controlled by one company, that's not really actually useful, right? DAOs are another good tool that you can use, but if the DAO is actually only controlled by a few entities, that's also not really using the tool the way that it could be. Ideally, there are decentralized price oracles as well. And a lot of projects do focus on this, and that's something that's a positive in the space, but this is something that can also be improved and made more decentralized. And then also distributed sharing of benefits. So For example, that means that all of the fees that are collected by the protocol are not going into a treasury that's controlled only by the company. And that's also something that we've seen.
So following up on that, we also have the concept of having open and decentralized governance for technical upgrades. So how we're defining parameters, changing them, upgrading protocols as they develop. Having an open and transparent process into how these decisions are being made is like an inherent quality of a decentralized system. And we'll talk about where we see a lot of projects lacking. The next one is, going along the bank the unbanked meme, which is how actually globally accessible these projects are. What is the KYC? Is there KYC necessary? And how accessible these products are to actually use is like a very important requirement into how we can actually create, true DeFi projects. And then the last one is, how the operations, that operations, the assets, the brands, like the communication channels or the logos or the money, you know what I mean, are not owned by one company. And so this is what we see a lot as you start to see these projects, emerging, is how are these projects controlled? Do they exist outside? They can operate without intermediary custody, but are they technically really operated by a company? And so this kind of like invisible hand of centralized, forces that come in the form of companies or projects or founders can take a toll on the decentralized aspects of DeFi projects.
It also does mean that it's open source, that there's an auditable history and censorship resistance. But we think that these points actually listed here are more important than those things in terms of really getting down into the details of these DeFi projects and if they're truly decentralized or not. So let's actually start to dig in to a few projects.
So to start, we thought we'd look at DYDX, right? So DYDX is a non-custodial trading platform that enables decentralized margin trading. And if we look at DYDX, it actually satisfies like all of these requirements. So there's no on-chain mechanism for any party to upgrade the logic of the base protocol of DYDX. And the team only retains the power to put the protocol into like a close-only mode in the event of like a major bug or vulnerability. And so if I skip ahead now, going along, like how does the protocol then get upgraded? If we go to how it's governed, like how technical upgrades are governed, they actually implement upgrades through the deployments of second layer contracts. So these are on top of the base protocol. So it's not the base protocol that's being updated, but it's actually contracts that are written and deployed on top of it. And these contracts can be they can be written and deployed by anybody, and the user of the protocol is actually in control of what contracts and what upgrades really that they want to use. So that creates like a very open and transparent process for how a protocol is being managed and governed, but also creates a more accessible way for how I interact with this protocol. So going back up to the top is that these second layer contracts, again, the decentralized price oracles, the second layer contracts enhance the margin calling mechanism. So it adds this extra protection for traders. So it's not really decentralizing the price oracles, but it's adding this like additional layer of security that has and kind of adds to the decentralized aspect of it. But then they also enable margin tokens. And so these margin tokens are freely tradable, fungible, and transferable. And they represent ownership interests in like DYDX margin positions. And so these definitely satisfy the distributed sharing of benefits. But again, it's like built on top of the protocol and not like really baked into the base protocol. And then there's no KYC needed. And the operations, assets, and brands are not owned by one company. There is a DYDX team, but again, this protocol like exists on its own. Like the team has the ability to have this closed-only mode, but outside of that, like it very much so is resilient and autonomous in its own right. So then we go to Compound. So Compound got a lot of flack by some like Medium articles, and we know that they've grown. So this is like first one, but then we'll have another analysis on Compound with their recent updates. But so Compound is an algorithmic autonomous interest rate protocol. And so it has a lot of, so if you look at the first requirement, it doesn't really have that much distributed intermediary control. So Compound has like 4 different administrative positions that, if compromised, could lead to the drainage of all lending pools. And this comes directly from Amin Soleimani's analysis of the Compound contracts. That kind of led to us realizing that like a lot of functionality of the contract architecture was like really controlled by these 4 admin keys, including the price oracles and all that different stuff. So there's not that much. There's a lot of like intermediary control in the custody process for the Compound protocol. But they do have like kind of decentralized price oracles. So they launched this thing called the Open Oracle system, which enables developers to contribute and leverage pricing data from a distributed price feed by kind of creating like a standard that allows reporters to assign key value pairs that interested users can post to the blockchain. And so this was in an effort to specifically decentralize this one part of the process, which is really cool. The third is the distributed sharing of benefits. So one could say that using the protocol, you're receiving some of the benefit because you're receiving the interest. But inherently in the protocol, there's this centrally controlled treasury of collected fees that Compound is producing and pooling. That's written in their white paper, which kind of actually leads to like a very centralized little aspect of this in relation to this requirement.
And on top of that, the fee that they're collecting is only determined by them.
Yeah, exactly. So then on to the open and decentralized governance for technical upgrades. Of course, we'll touch on what Compound has recently launched with their governance token later. But before this, the process was again designed to be only upgraded by these admin keys that are a result of the first requirement above. So the important contracts are proxies, which like simply point to a separate contract address which holds their implementation logic, and the admin keys can kind of change this at will. But the protocol does not require KYC to use. But Compound is like a VC-backed company, which is like not a bad thing, but like sad it as it is, right? And so the operations assets and brands are owned by one company. So
I think we were a little harsh on Compound, and I'm going to be a little harsh on Synthetics as well. So Synthetics is a crypto-backed synthetic asset platform that provides on-chain exposure to real-world currencies, commodities, stocks, and indices. And we would say it is pretty CeFi, actually. There is a proxy contract architecture which has significant control of the network. It has a centralized price oracle. So both of these things, would argue that Synthetics is actually controlled by one user. One positive side here is that there is a distributed sharing of benefits of the rewards, but at the same time, there is no open and decentralized governance. On the other hand, it's globally accessible, so anyone can use Synthetics, but the operations, assets, brands are all owned by Synthetics. And although this is a critique of Synthetics, the team has expressed a desire to actually open up the project, add an element of governance as well, probably, hopefully, opening up their contract architecture. So this is just to say that these projects, they really exist on a spectrum. And there's a spectrum between being really decentralized and being centralized, and they're not stuck in one place, right? They can actually start to move towards the decentralized side and open up the project. And so we really hope that projects are going to head into this direction. This is just a small sample that Abbey and I kind of...
I feel like we're going to get a lot of shit for this spectrum.
Yeah, everyone's taking photos. Like, we just put our thumb in the air and we're like, well, let's see what we think.
Totally subjective.
Don't really hold us to this.
But I think that the important point in the analysis and the creation of this spectrum is that there is like this specific lack in the governance and control of protocols and platforms. Like at the end of the day, these protocols can satisfy a lot of their requirements, but the decisions that how these protocols are parameterized and how changes are made and how they're developed can kind of be abstracted away in different implementations of governance, and just in general, like how the protocol, people decided to develop the protocol.
So jumping into what DAOs can do in DeFi. So how do we define DAOs in DeFi? And why do we think it's important? So we think DAO membership needs to be open and not limited to a specific group. That DAO members can actually propose and vote on changes, and their decisions are not blocked or modified by a central authority, and that they receive direct or indirect incentives from participating in this. And that actually aligns the incentives of all of the participants in the system.
And so that DAOs kind of now introduces this tool that can give us new means of introducing transparent and open governance into the technical upgrade process of protocols, or in the decision or the parameterization. And so that's an interesting thing that a lot of different projects are exploring. So let's take a look at a couple projects that are incorporating DAOs or trying to incorporate DAOs. And so the first is Maker DAOs. We all know Maker. Maker's pretty famous. But Maker is a decentralized org that's dedicated to stabilizing DAI, well, Psi and DAI. And Maker employs the Maker token for governing critical parameters of the Maker protocol. And so it really follows this formula of for-profit DAOs introducing token incentivized governance. And it satisfies the DAO requirements at a glance. But if you dive deeper, you kind of uncover a little bit of stuff, right? So DAO membership is open and not limited to a specific group, because anybody can buy Maker tokens and anybody can contribute, and contribute to the governance process. But there's such an unequal distribution across whales, like A16, that limit actually the access of this DAO to the common person. And so the governance process kind of becomes closed off because of this very substantial unequal distribution of tokens across the memberships. And so technically, the proposals and the decisions can be blocked or modified by a central authority, but a lot of things make this really convoluted, right? So again, if there's an unequal token distribution with aligned parties that maybe aren't aligned with other parties, these whales control most of the votes, and actually aren't one central authority, but are a collection of central authorities that are acting under the of the intentions of a central authority. And so although inherently the use of a DAO is, it can't be blocked or modified, it can, and it has been before. And also, the governance is kind of abstracted away. So in this governance UI that Maker uses, it only shows votes done by the Maker Foundation. And the Maker Foundation still holds this central authority over the Maker token, whether it's actually in the token distribution or actually in the, as I said, invisible hand of the foundation, and how it has its influence that it can exert in the Maker ecosystem. But it does satisfy the last requirement, because incoming interest rates back this buy burn, which reduces supply of the Maker token.
So, if Abbey started a DAO with 1,000 tokens representing ownership, but she kept 999 of them, what is even the point of me having the other token? There's probably no chance of me ever influencing anything. And I think this is something that a lot of projects haven't actually spent enough time looking at, is the distribution of the governance power. And just because anyone can hold Maker tokens doesn't mean that just anyone has influence or the ability to truly participate in MakerDAO. So look at Compound. Their DAO membership is technically going to be open and not limited. So this is their plan going forward. But right now, it's just distributed top-down from the Compound company. And at the same time, though, it does include delegation. So those that hold these Compound governance tokens can give voting power to non-token holders. So there's an element of openness that they're already trying to implement in the system, but we do hope that eventually this becomes a bit more open going forward. Anybody with 1% of these Compound governance tokens can propose a governance action. So that is something that makes it open to be able to propose on decisions. And I think this is something that is important. At the 1% they're using for spam prevention, basically. And so it is an element that we would say is in the green. They're doing well. But at the same time, it's not public yet. Incentives come in the ability to influence the development process. So there's a little bit of ways that Compound can grow going forward.
But on Compound, is that, I mean, they just introduced this, I forgot how long ago, but this governance token really resembles more of a community governance approach than a for-profit token incentivized governance approach, which is super nice, right? Because it's maybe taking the bad parts of maker governance and pairing the good parts, with the governance token, in which you could actually have an influence on proposals that are happening. So although it's centralized now, the plan is to progressively decentralize that, and that's super nice.
And this is also coming a long way from not having any governance at all.
Yeah.
So they're definitely going in the right direction here. And then a really nice finishing case study here on DXDAO. They really check all of our boxes. So DXDAO, the initial purpose is to govern DutchX protocols parameters. So this is smart contract logic, token whitelisting, et cetera. The DAO membership is open, so reputation was originally allocated to all of the users of DutchX protocol, but basically anyone who wants to lock down Ether or other tokens that are part of DutchX protocol can get reputation as well. And anyone with an Ethereum wallet address can create proposals for DXDAO, which is really cool that it's just open, really open for anyone. And then participation in the DutchX is providing these indirect incentives. So the ones that would want to participate in DXDAO are the ones using DutchX, and there are aligned incentives there. So we really think that they check all of the boxes and doing a really great job in terms of using this tool in a way that would actually be impactful to decentralizing the project. But at the same time, it's not getting a ton of use. And so these much bigger projects like MakerDAO and Compound are not using these kind of tools. And this project is also not getting as much traction, probably, as they would like. So pros and cons there as well.
So also there's the incorporation of DAOs, but there's also just the incorporation of additional governance layers that have DAO-esque qualities, right? So Melon implemented the Melon Council, which is basically an Aragon DAO for on-chain voting regarding a bunch of different things with the Melon project. So that includes inviting new members, adjusting the is it AMGU or AMGU? I don't know, I've never said it out loud. Price, updating the subdomains, and updating protocol parameters, and making decisions about inflation spending. So this is super nice because although it's a specific group of people, and it's, again, not really built in to the protocol, it's this layer on top that is still introducing more transparency and openness into the decision-making process regarding how Melon is being managed and deployed and developed. And then the second is Uniswap. So Uniswap kind of has this invisible DAO built into how it works, right? So it allows any a DEX participant to list any token for trading by allowing them to create a liquidity pool. And then these participants actually own shares in the pool that entitle them to the pool revenue. And so this satisfies that financial the incentive DAO requirement and kind of creates more of this distributed incentive alignment, more into the actual protocol and into how it works. And so that's another really cool layer that we'd like to call out.
So the problems that we think that DAOs can really address, starting with reducing the risk of financial systems, and they really do this by increasing the transparency of systemic risks within the system. They can actually start to align the incentives much better of all the stakeholders that are involved, open up access for participation in the governance processes, and increase transparency into that decision-making process itself. So these are really key areas where DeFi projects can start to use DAO to open up different layers of their systems.
So this is another maybe just slide that we threw in.
Hot take.
Hot take. But again, I think there does need to be like maybe not even a narrative shift, but like a realization that like DAOs don't have to be for-profit token incentivized governance, right? Like we can be looking into progressively introducing more open and transparent governance into DeFi projects and protocols that reduce the systemic risks of centralization, right? Like yes, we all progressive decentralization is a thing because it's safer to introduce centralization at the forefront. But if we aren't like very aware of how that centralization can propagate and like continue and like leave residue, then again we're just gonna end up with these projects that like don't really satisfy, these and don't really like live up to the DeFi definition. And so just to go back to that, is that open accessible DAOs can enable open and accessible community governance that have aligned incentive models, financial or non-financial, and we're seeing that implemented in projects now, and exploration into that for other projects is something that should be encouraged and supported.
So to end and draw this together, we want to focus on progressive decentralization. So not just minting governance tokens controlled by VC whales, not just recreating centralized financial tools that already exist today and just putting it on a blockchain, and not introducing systemic risks into this emergent new ecosystem. So building towards a true DeFi.
Nice. Thanks, guys.
I'm not sure if we have any time for questions.
Okay, cool.
Do we? Can we take some questions or?
No, he says no.
Okay, all right.
Cool. Great, thanks.